Welcome to the news for the week of 12 April 2020 in the time of plague. Today, wild-eyed conspiracies, gay frogs, and lead cod pieces, not to mention C-suite targets, Zoom credential stuffing, and Zombieware. That's my term. All this and Jason Wood on today's Security Weekly News.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week, your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. As technology continues to evolve and expand, so have the countless ways our critical systems can be put in jeopardy. Ransomware attacks, misconfiguration, user error, and malicious threat actors, to name a few. As IT infrastructures continue to grow and diversify, how do you ensure stable security? Core Security, a HelpSystems company, provides an analytics-driven, layered approach to security with a portfolio that enables both proactive and reactive responses. With Core Security, you can reduce risk by limiting access, detect upcoming and active threats, test for security weaknesses, and efficiently monitor data for actionable insights. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/core security.
All right. Well, let's get to the news. On the Checkpoint Global Threat Index, Dridex, which is a really old banking Trojan, is now, get this, the third most prevalent malware on the Checkpoint Global Threat Index. Sorry, I almost sneezed there. Yeah, it did run. The first two are XMRig, which is a CPU miner, and JSE Coin, which is another crypto miner like Dridex. Now, Dridex was originally, so this was back in like 2011, Dridex was a spam delivered kit that targets Windows and tries to mine banking credentials. So that was its sort of whole purpose in life. But Dridex, and sort of the point of this story, Dridex has been refitted, and now it's being used as a framework. So what's happening is people are going out and they're rounding up old malware that was effective, and they're refitting the delivery system with new payload capability. So they're going out, they're dragging up these old tools, and because of that, they're able to rapidly shift and outmaneuver all the anti-malware signature type engines. Currently, TrickBot and Emotet are fourth and fifth on that index, and they are the very same kind of thing, where they're older tools that got refitted and re-outfitted and continually get modified to be new frameworks for the delivery of, in particular, ransomware. And I think that's going to keep going. I think that list is just going to shift around like the Billboard Top 500 in the future. And as all these old tools get dredged up and they get refitted and put back into use, and then when they start getting detected, they yank them back out of service and just keep rotating them through like that. I've been calling stuff like this Zombieware because it's basically old stuff that is brought back from the dead and set to some task. So I think Zombieware is a pretty good name for it, at least to me. So that's just how I've been thinking of it. Another word for it was Golem, which is like a terracotta creature that's brought to life. And I know not that Golem. You know what I'm talking about, the other Golem. Okay, not Smeagol. All right, listen, enough with the 5G nonsense, okay? So this story was about in the Netherlands, people were going out and they're burning 5G towers. So wild-eyed conspiracy theorists started rumors last year that due to the smaller wavelengths being used in 5G, and that had never been tested. Now, you got to be real careful about that, but that was sort of their claim. And that essentially what's happening right now is that 5G was being tested on humans. So we were being used as guinea pigs. Now, 5G uses a 2 to 8 gigahertz, which is a higher frequency, so smaller waves, than the current 4G, which is like 1.8 to 2.5 gigahertz. So where did all this fuss get started from? Well, so there's a theory. There's always a theory, right? Hence the name conspiracy theory. The theory, but this is maybe the true part. The theory is that either Russia or China, and I went and I did all kinds of more reading than I wanted to do on this. Either Russia or China wants to slow the rollout of 5G around the world because they're not quite there yet with their networks. And so they started all these silly rumors to get people to thwart the use of 5G. That's kind of plausible. I don't think anybody has any evidence that that is true. And the other part of it is that new technology always starts all sorts of conspiracy theories. We've seen this with cell phones, going all the way back. We've seen this with other technologies. We've seen this about radio. We've seen it about television. We've seen it about all kinds of things, Wi-Fi. I found so many crazy rumor conspiracy things reading about this, whether it was on YouTube or it was news articles or so on. Everything from that 5G was designed to sterilize human males. I put my cell phone in a lead box now. But designed to sterilize human males, and this was and these are called star chamber conspiracies, if you don't know, and they usually imply there's some secret council. One of them is that the secret council meets under Denver International Airport. I'm not making that up. That's a real conspiracy. And that the king of the world, which is some nebulous figure, is actually underneath Denver Airport. You look that one up if you don't believe me. But that there was also one that this causes autism, and I don't really know what the purpose of that was. All the way to stuff like that it was turning frogs into homosexual frogs. I was, what? Like, people listen to this? But, and then, of course, the penultimate conspiracy theory about 5G currently is that the 5G tests have caused COVID-19. And it goes on, and it gets weirder. There's weirder stuff than it turning frogs gay. Let me tell you that there's some people out there that are really way out in some other place. The most notable part of this theory is that it's some kind of star chamber group that are trying to use it for population control. So this is the 1% trying to get rid of all of us peasants so that they, have more parking for their lots and their McLarens or whatever. According to the CDC and the World Health Organization, and the conspiracy people always get around this big going, oh, well, they're in on it, because everybody's in on it unless you, it's a very nasty little circular logic thing, that there's no clear link between radio signals, which all of us have been being exposed to all of our lives, and human health. Now, they do go on and say there's not really any clear indication that it doesn't do something. And all of us are continually bathed in radio frequency signals all day, every day, whether it's from cell phones, Wi-Fi, AM, FM, whatever you want. Everything is emitting signals, and we're all sort of swimming in it. So far, none of us have turned into gay frogs that I know of. If you have turned into a gay frog, let me know, because it sounds like a pretty good time, really. Give me a call. I personally think it's just more of the same conspiracy stuff that always emerges, just like people were talking about brain cancer when they were using cell phones, and there's never any, support for that. But there are no known links between 5G and COVID-19 that anyone can demonstrate without using lots and lots of circular logic and saying that everyone is in on it. I've been using 5G. I don't have COVID-19. And they say, oh, yeah, but, they didn't include you. So get out of the dark ages and let's quit listening to these idiots, because that just encourages them. If they're rumors that were started by foreign nation states, ignore them. If they're really just, tinfoil hat wearing idiots, I would say let's just leave them alone and let them sit around and worry about this kind of stuff. More science, please. But if not, if you want to, you can go to www.securityweekly.com and buy one of my designer tinfoil hats for only $19.95. And if you buy today, we will throw in a customized lead cod piece with a picture of Larry Pesci on it, just in case there's like gay frogs, radio waves targeting your groin or whatever. But keep in touch on that. Sorry, I kind of had a rant about that. That stuff drives me crazy. CyberCube released a report that indicated that ransomware and other phishers are moving away from the high-volume, low-value model and increasingly using spear phishing to target C-suite employees. since those individuals are much more likely to have access to bank accounts and other valuable information. This probably makes a lot of sense with credential stuffing being such a common and successful type of attack. You get a lot more bang for your buck in credential stuffing when you're getting the CEO's email and password information through these types of attacks. The report did go on to indicate that ransomware in general is focusing much more on organizations due to an evolving business model for cybercrime. Because you are going to be able to get me to pay $1 million in ransom, but a large organization is much more likely to pay, and they're also going to be much more desperate. They probably hired some MBAs, to model this, or the data, or something like that. Maybe some ex-Lehman Brothers employees or somebody like that. All right. According to this next report, over 500,000 Zoom accounts are being sold on the dark web for less than 1 cent each. Or they're even being given away for free. This was a company who was reporting on this. Again, these are credential stuffing attacks. They are primarily, I think, targeting Zoom rather than stealing from Zoom, because what the article goes on to say is that these were not stolen from Zoom. They were really designed to be used against Zoom, because they know that a lot of fairly juvenile people are targeting their classes and their teachers and so forth with this. Then a lot of teachers don't know how to use this. And most of these schools and people who set this stuff up very quickly did not have time to set up two-factor or multi-factor authentication. So be sure that you advise, if you're supporting some of these kinds of organizations, that you advise your people that are using these. And it's not just Zoom. Again, credential stuffing, if it's working, it'll work with Zoom and Skype and everything else. So if you've got people using this stuff, and you probably do, go out there and be sure and advise them to set, unique password, unique strong passwords on all those devices if you can't use two-factor or authentication. There was heavy targeting of universities at K-12. There's also heavy targeting of healthcare. So, there's always people that are just don't get it. SANS reported that TCP 3389, which is RDP open port, had increased by the detection of the open ports had increased by 40% in March. Big surprise there, as workers moved home for the foreseeable future. My take on that was, of course, that basically people don't know what they're dealing with. They don't know how to use the VPN. They don't know how to get on the VPN. And, they just tell their employees, okay, here, do this, and it'll get you on, and we'll fix it later. And it kind of turns into a triage, big hole left open. Shodan also reported that video conferencing this year had increased by 500%, and overall internet traffic had doubled, essentially, since they started shutting things down. So since we can't necessarily monitor home use, and a lot of our new users are really, really inexperienced, I think an uptick in targeting of the users is not far behind. Despite what I said earlier about the move towards C-suite, I think there's a lot of targeting of all these new home users, and if nothing more than just Zoom bombing kind of things that are going on. The World Economic Forum released its Global Risk Report for 2020, which claims that cybercrime will be the second most concerning risk for global commerce, and will likely be the third, listen to this, the third largest economy in the world by 2021. That there's so much money involved in cybercrime. That was pretty, I read that several times to make sure I read it correctly, and I was like, yikes. The report didn't even likely take into account this movement by everybody home, everyone online. And so essentially at this point, everyone in the world who can work is working from home online. So we have certainly changed the metric there in terms of how many people we're dealing with online and how skilled they are. Ransomware in particular is rapidly moving into the industrial age. It's moving away from whatever you call the age before the industrial age. I mean, I know what you call that in society, but I don't know what you call it in technology. So it's moving out of the agrarian age and rapidly into the industrial age of technology. As you see all these new frameworks, custom malware, malware providers, malware, headless malware, and on and on and on, stuff that is going on currently. So as we see these cybercrime for hire services and cybercrime frameworks continue to escalate, I would say this report is pretty spot on. Jim Clark and Tom Jermoluk, formerly of Netscape and others, put $30 million in Series A funding into their new firm, Beyond Identity, which is another attempt to find a way to eliminate passwords. We've seen lots of focus on that, and they were obviously doing this before all this chaos started. This new thing they're doing, which is sort of new, sort of not new, is based on X509 certificates and SSL. And if you didn't remember, SSL was invented at Netscape, so that was one of their previous adventures. The new approach, which is basically another focus on the use of biometrics in smartphones and storing, here's the different part, storing of a self-certificate on the smartphone, and it never leaves the smartphone device. This ends up being a certificate, an X509 SSL certificate, that is going to sit on your device forever and tie you to that phone. So this creates then what they call the chain of trust, which I guess everybody calls it that, but it's a chain of trust for you. They're planning to release this in late 2020 was what they said. They may be pushing ahead with that now. I know there's all this discussion about how for people to vote online in the United States, how to vote remotely. Is there some way to make sure there's not, fraud, whatever? Maybe something like this is going to be certainly well positioned to move forward. Sophos released Sandboxy for free this week. Sandboxy is a nice sandbox isolation program that had been a proprietary part of Sophos since about 2017. They bought it and added it to their proprietary software. But as of, I think it was yesterday, actually it was a couple of days, I think, they made the code open source and they released it via sandboxy.com if you are interested in such things. They are not going to update it going forward, but hey, since it's open source, you essentially can update it yourself and or use it to your heart's content. It runs on a lot of different platforms. If you never used it, it's kind of an interesting thing to play around with. And CyberX, in that same light, released their addressing the MITRE attack for ICS matrix today as well. So they put out a white paper explaining how CyberX uses MITRE attack for ICS, and I put a link to that on the wiki. So you have to request it, but you can give them, all they ask for is an email, so you can use whatever email you want to give to them. And I'll reiterate this from last time. Gary Berman, if you didn't see all this last year at DEF CON, or 2 years ago at DEF CON, released a comic called Cyber Hero Adventures that was a pretty nice thing for free. And he released a new one called Defending Your Health, which is focused on medical facilities. So if you're interested in that, be sure you can Google that and check it out. And with that, when we return, we welcome the guy with the most zombie kills in the West. Jason Wood, who is going to join us from the bunker with expert commentary on security and an analysis of a credit card swiping tool. So stick around.
The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
All right, so we're back. We're joined now by our often guest, Jason Wood. Jason, welcome aboard.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here as always. And as Doug said, I wanted to focus a little bit about a credit card skimming bit of malware that is targeting WooCommerce. And if you read the headline at ThreatPost on a blog post they released a few days back, it says WooCommerce falls to Fresh Card-Skimming Malware. And you look at this and you think, okay, so there's a new vulnerability in WooCommerce or something like that that's being taken advantage of here. And that actually is not the case at all. It's just kind of the victim in this situation. The analysis was actually done by a gentleman named Ben Martin, a security researcher at Securi. I've got the links to both his original blog post and the threat post article here in the show notes. So definitely, if you're interested in this, I recommend checking it out, because I'm going to do my best to read off some of this information, but you probably want to look at the original file names and paths and stuff there. The basic idea, though, is that this bit of malware is written to run inside of WordPress sites running WooCommerce for e-commerce type of activity. The card stealing software is written in JavaScript primarily, and it kind of put a new twist, according to Ben, on the theft of credit card data in these types of transactions. In this case, the card skimmer doesn't actually modify WooCommerce, nor does it take advantage of any vulnerability inside of WooCommerce. Instead, it modifies two core files that are part of WordPress, and then adds an additional PHP file to the system to perform the data theft. So just again, as like I said, the blog post makes it sound, by threat post makes it sound like this was a vulnerability in WooCommerce, and that's really not the case. That's just they're the target for it. So I wanted to dive in and take a look at this, because I just thought it was interesting. I've had to clean up or compromised WordPress sites before, so this caught my eye. So first off, the attacker has to get some kind of method of access to the WordPress site. They have to exploit the site in some way. And now this could be through a brute force attack on login credentials, or maybe some other vulnerable plugin, or maybe even a hosting provider password, for FTP or SFTP or something like that. Regardless, the attacker gets into the WordPress site, and they modify, like I said, two core files. One of them is wp-includes/js/jquery/jquery.js. So obviously jQuery JavaScript file, and it modifies wp-includes/functions.php. The modification to functions.php adds a line to require an additional PHP file that is then created by the attacker and placed on the file system. What's happening inside of the jQuery file? Well, what's going on there is the attacker adds their code towards the end of the legitimate jQuery.js file. They just modify it. So it's something you would expect to see there running inside of the site. It's required for WordPress to function. And they just add additional code and kind of stick it, as Ben put it, towards the end of the file before the ending jQuery.noConflict method call, or method definition. This code basically is what copies the credit card information, including the CVV, and places them into plain text cookies, which I thought, okay, well, that's a weird spot to store this data. But we'll get to why they did that here in just a second. The added code is not easy to spot in this file, because just like all jQuery and JavaScript libraries, everything is minimized, minified, whatever. So, it's compressed down. There's no white space or anything like that, and it just kind of blurs together. It wasn't something you manually spot. The reason why Ben discovered this was he ran an integrity check on the core WordPress files, found a modification, and then he was able to chase it down to this particular point. So now that the attacker has the credit card information stored inside of these cookies, they have to somehow get it out of there, because this would be being used inside of the user's browser. So that's not particularly useful sounding. What they did is they created that modification to functions.php to call a file named class-wp-rest-api.php. This is an additional file created by the attacker, but it looks very much like something that would be legitimate. And this file has, in addition to being new, has much more obvious signs of a malicious bit of PHP code running on a site. They basically do, encoding all of the all over the place, concatenation, and all kinds of stuff to obfuscate what's happening here and make it really difficult for somebody to analyze the code and determine what it's doing. If you're familiar with reversing this type of code, this is going to scream of malicious, because developers don't typically do this because it's obnoxious for them to deal with. But in the case of somebody doing malware type of activity, they do want to hide that. And they want to make it so that if a kind of basic owner of a website looks at this, they get very intimidated, they run away and hide from it and ignore it. They don't know what it is. What happens here is that it turns out that this code takes the data stored in the cookies, presumably on a subsequent request to the website, and writes the data to two image files inside of .wp-content/uploads. And then the attacker can then come and collect the data from the images. What's also interesting about this is the data in the images that Ben was analyzing actually had already been zeroed out. So in his case, he's suspecting, in the incident he's examining, he suspects that the malware is automatically clearing the data from the files after it's been collected by the attackers. Now, obviously, this is a little bit of a problem. When we run into how do we defend against this, what do we need to do to resolve the issue? In a lot of cases with things like this, we would look at it and say, okay, there's a plugin update that needs to be done or something like that to prevent this from occurring. But that's not the case, because again, there's no vulnerability inside of WooCommerce itself. There's no update to WooCommerce. In fact, there's really not much WooCommerce can do. They depend on WordPress, the core code, to run and do all the things that it does within the site for it to function. So, and that's where the modification is occurring, is inside of WordPress. So here's some suggestions from Ben Martin on how to deal with this. If you're a WordPress site owner and you're concerned about this, maybe running WooCommerce, one of the modifications you can make is to your wp-config.php file to prevent the editing of files inside of the web interface. And you do that by adding a line that says, in quote, it's just define, open parentheses, single quote, disallow _filed _edit, single quote, comma, true, closing parentheses, and a semicolon. It's got that in the show notes. Don't have to remember it here. But you add that line to your WP config file, and that prevents you from now being able to edit your source code from the web interface. Attacker gets access to the web interface by brute forcing credentials to it, or maybe there's a vulnerable plugin that gives them access to the admin console. That'll prevent this from being able to be exploited there. However, if the attack occurred to something like compromised FTP, SFTP, or some other hosting password, the victims are obviously going to need to change those passwords. To fix this, you're going to have to roll out, the correct versions that are fresh from WordPress.org, and overwrite the attacker's code. Then one of the defenses we should be always looking at are things like file integrity monitoring, comparing your files inside of your WordPress core installation to the files that are in your current version, which, since we're always updating and keeping up to date on our WordPress installations, that should be the current release version, right? You also want to make sure you're updating plugins and things like that. All in all, this was an interesting read. If you're interested in, if you're concerned in this attack, because maybe you're running a WordPress site with WooCommerce, definitely want to check it out. Or if you're just interested in this type of analysis of compromised website, it's also worth taking a read through. Check out the original post. I've got the links here in the show notes, both to the security blog and the threat post blog. Go take a read through it. Definitely something to be kind of interesting, a new trend here or change in that the attackers are not targeting the plugin itself for WooCommerce, but actually going after WordPress core.
Thank you, Jason. As ever, that was cool. as much as I dislike JavaScript, I have to take a look at that. Finally, an Australian couple was fined roughly $3,300 US for violating lockdown in Victoria. Apparently, the police saw photos of the couple out and about having a good time on Facebook. So they were posting pictures on Facebook of them having sort of a good time, and they went to the couple's house, served them warrants, and served all these citations to them for violating the lockdown, which I was like, wait, they went to their house even though they were, okay, well, we won't apply logic. The photos they were posting were from 2019. So they were at home bored. They decided to post some pictures of a trip they took last year. Apparently, somebody took that pretty seriously. Australia has some of the strictest rules about the lockdown. And in a place where literally everything is trying to kill you, well, I can see why. Sorry, Australia, but it's like every time you see a critter, you go, "Oh, how cute!" And then they find out it's got fangs or something. But the charges were dropped after there was a massive public outcry about the fines, obviously. So maybe for now, just post photos of yourself in your living room, like in sweats or something, or I don't know. But who knows? Anyway, that's the news for now. In the time of plague, I'm Doug White. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Security Weekly News. I'll be back Friday with the Security News Weekly Wrap-Up. Sir Isaac Newton kind of invented calculus during his lockdown. What are you up to? See you then.